Bam! MC is in the house. What's up, folks? My name is Justin Garcia, also known as Master Chim, and welcome to the Warrior Stream. I'm here every Wednesday, almost every Wednesday. I put out a message last week that I wasn't going to be there since I was teaching at the Modern Warrior Conference down in Texas. But I'm here usually every Wednesday from 12 noon Eastern Standard Time, usually the better part of an hour. And what I do is I take a topic, I deep dive, and have a good time while doing it, usually joined by a good group of fine men and women who also want to deal with these topics. And this week is no exception. So before we get into it, I got a pretty, I think, valuable topic to cover. But before we get into that, just a little bit of housekeeping. If you are not getting the Master Chim letter, that is my daily free email newsletter. Go to masterchim.com/letter or masterchimletter.com. I got a bunch of different ways you could sign up. Wherever you're watching, whether it's on YouTube or one of the Facebook channels, you could just go in the description and it'll be there. As we record this live right now, those of you that are watching that have questions that you want me to answer, do me a favor and please just add the context of the question. One of the things that I notice is sometimes people will leave a question and the context will be whatever they happen to see us going over. There is a little bit of a delay in the live recording and you guys watching it. And there's also, sometimes I'll go on for a bit covering some stuff. I'll come back and sometimes I don't necessarily see the context of the questions that are being asked. So just to sort of make that a little bit more seamless. Aside from that, a lot of other relevant, links are in the description. So do me a favor and check those out. Currently, my the Three Roads Mastermind group is closed. Registration is closed. So if you want to get on the waiting list for that, the link's in the description. But every once in a while, I open it up trying to give people who want in the opportunity to do so. So in case you go there and it's not open, just understand that I will do that from time to time, but it's worth putting your email down for the waiting list. So all that being said, who do we got here? My man, Jamie, what's up, brother, man? Good to see you. Corey, good to see you as usual. Jamie, my man up in Canada, good to see you, brother, man. Wantu is in the house. Good afternoon to you. Big Mike, my man in Idaho. Good to see you, brother, man. Missed you on the call this morning. Glad you're making this, midday stop. But good to see you, as always. All right, so today's topic, recruit, don't convert. Recruit, don't convert. A bunch of different things we could discuss concerning the topic, but starting off with an overview, I've said this before. If I'm not mistaken, White Boy Pat and me made a podcast episode about this very topic probably 10 years ago at this point. So this is certainly not something new, but it is something that needs to be repeated from time to time because there are more temptations to convert, not recruit, right? And battling those temptations and staying on mission is what my mission is, right? So when we say recruit, don't convert, terms mean things, and we'll get into the terms as we go along. But the basic idea is there is a distinction to be made between how you connect with people, what you're doing to connect with like-minded people, with people that could form productive alliances with you. Just being around more people for the sake of it does not have an inherent value. So obviously there is a criteria by which we want to measure the value of these new alliances. It turns out when we recruit like-minded people as opposed to converting not unlike-minded people, right? People who don't necessarily agree with you, we tend to do better. The cost of acquisition, to use a little bit of a business term, is a lot lower when you try to connect with people that upon hearing your message, want to form an alliance, right? So for me, the most valuable resource we have is time. Converting people wastes their time. Trying to convince people of something they don't believe is a waste of time. Obviously, it goes beyond time. There are plenty of other things that get wasted, but time is the top of the food chain. where resources are concerned. And that's one of the reasons that everybody should be interested in understanding this concept of recruiting as opposed to converting. You see, all of us, we have our own take on what life is, what life's supposed to be, what's right, what's wrong. And these, a lot of times preference-based, ethics and moralities tend to have offset and overlap with the people we're around. Some people we get along with, we have a lot in common, and then we have the opposite. There's a spectrum where that's concerned. But if you're following me, if you agree with any of the messaging that I put out there, chances are you are not one of these three categories that I would cover. And I have some notes here just to keep me on task. But the three types of people I don't want you to ever allow yourself to sort of accommodate in the pursuit of your own mission are the normies, the fence sitters, and what we collectively now as a society call the NPCs, right? The NPCs. So the normies are the people that they want to stay in the middle of the road. They want to have the most people like them. They don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to have themselves spotlit in any way that is uncomfortable for them. They want to, go along to get along. They're usually in these traps of keeping up with the Joneses and whatnot. And I'm somebody who advocates for the celebration of life. So the celebration of challenge and adversity, looking to live a life that creates a forge that allows us to transform ourselves into something more, into something I would argue better. And finding the normie role in that is not really something that is possible. At the heart of what my position is on pursuing success in life, it is not having the approval of the masses, right? So normies are people that the juice ain't worth the squeeze in terms of the investment that we tend to try to give these people. The next category is fence sitters, right? Fence sitters are the ones who are so weak, so fragile, so nebulous in their relationship with who they are that they can't make a decision. And being around people or populating your tribe with people that can't make a decision at some point is going to be a liability, right? There's the meme that goes around on the internet with the different ways that the joke is that wives, you ask them where they want to go to eat and they just can't come up with an answer, and there's a whole an endless supply of memes that mock that thing. Well, there are just as many men who will sit on the fence and wait until somebody pulls them or pushes them off in one direction or the other, right? But when it happens, what they want and necessary in their identity is that they not be the one that makes the decision. They want other people to make the decision. And the last group are the NPCs. Now, the NPCs could certainly be a composite of the first two categories, right? The normies and the fence sitters. But NPCs are the people who don't want to live an adventure. They don't want to blaze a trail. They don't want to follow their own fate, destiny, according to who they are and what they feel compelled to do. These are the people that are completely satisfied and content living in the background of action, right? The background of, we could say, life itself. And if you're somebody who is looking to recruit, these types of people tend right off the bat to not overlap with that requirement, right? So you will have to convert a lot of those three categories, those three types of individuals that I just described. So obviously, recruit, don't convert tells us right off the bat, my position is that we don't waste time trying to do so. In Tribalnomics, I talk about leadership, and I talk about leadership being a compass, not a direction. The idea of leadership is I know the way to go. The way to go is outside of my identity, outside the identities of my followers, but collectively they believe that I know how to get them there. Well, part of that is not convincing people. Part of it is modeling a behavior, establishing a direction, and the movement that gives them the opportunity to follow suit. There's a difference between leading somebody to a destination and compelling somebody to follow that destination or to pursue that destination. And that is not leadership, right? That is control, something different. So when we're converting people, Aaron, what's up, darling? Good to see you. My man, Johnny Groob, good to see you, brother man. Back in action. So let's talk a little bit about, what the difference is between converting and recruiting. I've alluded to it in some ways, up until this point already, but just a little bit more directed language. When we convert people, we're emotionally chasing approval. We're trying to take people that have an established position or direction, and we're trying to compel them through some persuasive means to go in a different direction. And there's a lot of reasons why people do this. I'm not somebody that looks to convert people. I'll admit that there was a time where I did look to convert people, and I have a list of reasons as to why people do look to convert people. And myself, I admit, some of these applied to me. And let's just get into what I'm going to describe. So the reason people convert, a lot of times it's insecurity. They want to validate their own identity. So the way that they do that is they tell themselves, if I can change this person, number one, it allows me to be accepted by that person as being of value, since they have to concede my point. But another thing that comes from trying to convince somebody to convert to your position is some people actually mistake that as proof of their position being valid. If I can convince this person that, humans could eat plastic and sustain themselves, like this person's approval or acceptance or conversion to that position somehow makes plastic more edible to humans. One thing has nothing to do with the other. So when we look to convert people, there is this embedded implication that the more people we convert, the more valid our position is in general, where obviously it only becomes more valid to the people that you've converted for as long as you can keep them converted, right? So when we convince people through conversion, it's a poor substitute, for good leadership to build an actual tribe. If we're trying to convince people that what they think, what they feel, or even know to be true is actually inaccurate, and what you're offering is better, and you establish the value of that new position by damning their own position, right? By condemning their position, by beating their position down, it's a poor substitute for people actually discovering overlap with their identity and with the group that you're trying to lead. So when we're converting people, it's a very, very poor way to build a tribe of individuals that are collectively looking to pursue the same mission. So another thing, why people try to convert other people, there's a narcissism involved. There's I'm more valid. I need feedback to validate me in order to feel good. And a lot of times, because they're trying to convert other people, the delivery of that narcissistic requirement is it is disguised as benevolence. I am not trying to get you to agree with me. I am not trying to undermine your belief in your own positions. I'm trying to help you. And it's fraudulent, it's inaccurate, it's ineffective, it's unsustainable. It's obviously not something that I agree with, right? So converting, these are all the reasons why converting is just so, I would say, long-term, it's just a weak strategy to have, right? So recruiting then, what does recruiting look like? We want to recruit instead of convert. I just told you all the reasons we shouldn't be converting people. Well, what is the opposite then? Well, what is the path we're supposed to be taking? Recruiting is basically establishing who you are in a way that people are attracted to the model that you're sharing. And of these people that are attracted to your model, we have a criteria by which we selectively connect to them through alliance. It's investing in people who are ready for the pressure and purpose of the model that you are demonstrating, right? I'm going to be me. I'm going to be me consistently, unapologetically, as I model who I am and the actions, the rituals and beliefs that I represent. As I model that outwardly, there will be some people who resonate with the energy that I'm putting out there in a way that compels them to try and connect with me. And in each one of these situations, there's going to be overlap and offset, right? It's not finding people that are just like you. It's not finding people that have some degree of overlap and you're forcing them to ignore the offset. That would tend to be tyrannical. But recruiting is sort of sharing your path. It's not compelling or mandating your beliefs. It's allowing people to remain who they are and not have to compromise who you are in the process. There are ways that we could build alliances that are more effective, some, more effective than others. And sometimes it's creating, challenges or compliance with certain rituals. There's oaths and challenges, or I already said challenges, maybe tests to sort of get through the threshold of being connected to you in alliance or entering, more generally your tribe. But at no point do we tell people they just have to mimic or simulate what is ideal in my tribe in order for them to be allowed to enter into it, right? A point that I made with, converting is, and I'll reiterate it here, when you're actively, consistently, respectfully performing your identity, it will create a pull, a sort of gravity towards people that resonate with that identity. We don't want to have these open door policies that if people just come into contact with you, you are bribing them, you are incentivizing them through some bribing process to connect with you, because it is the acquisition of that bribe, the resources that the bribe represents, that obviously explains why they would connect to you. They may also have this overlap with you, but you won't know if that's the means or the process by which you connect with them. So, you want to be who you are. You want to establish who you are in a way that you can believe in who you are. This is, in the 3 roads, I talk about establishing your identity and building self-power, right? That's the first road of the 3 roads for those of you that have never checked out that content. But my idea is there's a priority in establishing who you are, understanding who you are to the point that you could actually engage the friction or even conflict of stressors and still maintain your identity. If you are somebody who can only withstand the friction of an echo chamber, then in order to be who you are, you need to limit yourself to echo chambers. If you're somebody who believes in who he is to the point where the external world is not sort of necessary or relied upon to maintain who you are, well, then you could explore and have any adventure you want. So when we're creating a culture from a position of leadership where people are attracted, we want to tell them, if we're not for you, then don't come here, because we're not going to change who we are to accommodate what you showed up with in terms of expectations. It's why, we do want to have thresholds. We do want to have not these revolving doors, these open doors that just, proximity creates tribal bonds. That might be a great a predecessor to strong tribal connections. But just because somebody's around you doesn't mean that you are compelled to stay connected to one another, right? So we don't want to put ourselves in a position where people are having to be convinced or bribed to stay connected to us. So another part of that, if we say recruit, don't convert, you need to have something to recruit or invite people to. If you do not know who you are, if you have not created a collection of rituals and maybe allies that share those rituals with you, which is where we would start using the term tribe, right? If you are not doing that already, well, then why would somebody ever look to connect with you? Why would anybody ever look to connect with an individual who has no respectable consistency in the presentation of their identity? Why would an individual ever look to connect with a tribe, a group of people who do not have a consistent pursuit of identity, a consistent pursuit of mission? That uncertainty, that ambiguity just creates more chaos for the individual. Nobody's going to be compelled or attracted to that type of a connection, right? So the first thing is, you need to have some place that is consistent with your identity that these people can be recruited to. So this is an argument for now this, and if it's 3 roads, we'll follow that model. It's my model for a reason. After we establish who we are at an individual level, we then create a connection with like-minded individuals. That starts to be a group alliance. If that group alliance is connected to the legacy of the individual, we start to use the term tribe. If that group alliance is very mission specific, we use the word syndicate, right? This is the terms that I use in tribalnomics to make these distinctions. But if you have a group of good friends at your gym that you go work out in, and you see them every day, you walk in and it's like the old, what was that TV show? Cheers. Norm walks in, everybody goes Norm, and he waves hi. Like if you have these social settings where you're a valued member, but this is not an environment that's connected to the legacy of who you are, I use the term syndicate. And it's to denote a group alliance that is not yet tribe worthy, right? They're not strangers. They're connected to you in a group context, but the group inherently does not deal with, your legacy as an individual, right? Some of you guys can have a great group of friends from your gym, but you don't know anybody's wives. You've never met anybody's children. You might not even know where any of them live or what any of them do. But in that environment, you have a very overlapped functional alliance, a group alliance, right? So these terms mean things. So to that, if you are an individual in the first road of 3 roads who has established his identity in a way that he could withstand the stresses of his environment, and you go out and you model that, and modeling that has you connect with other people to the point where there is a syndicate or a tribe, or more generally a group alliance. Well, now you have to embody the standard of that group if you are looking to recruit other people into it. They need to look at you and they need to say, okay, he's walking the walk. I can't tell you how many times, because of a lack of accountability, because of the anonymity of modern society, you can get away without having to walk the walk. If you think about how many times people are affected by trolls online, anonymous trolls online, and they needn't be anonymous. They could have their whole identity there, but these people are so removed from your real world experience that they might as well be anonymous, right? Yet we connect with them in a way that really implies more relevance than it actually has. In other words, you are creating value for these individuals. They don't inherently have that value, so you have to be somebody that, that not only understands who he is as an individual, but he also connects with people that can create synergy with that identity. I know who I am. I connect with people that I can continue to be who I am. They can continue to be who they are. And collectively, we create a synergy that transcends the sum of us, our individual potential. 1 + 1 equals more than 2, in other words, right? And that's a distinction between strong groups and weak groups. You see, weak groups, they look to recruit everybody. They look to just keep the doors open and, have people join their group by any means necessary. Stronger tribes recruit selectively. So just because we're recruiting and not converting doesn't mean that you're off the hook. There is a standard of recruitment that you want to maintain that does not betray your identity, that does not betray the identity of the group you're a part of, right? To speak on, who we got here? Aaron, I think I said what's up to you, but good to see you. Oh, she says this page instead. Okay, instead of those other groups and whatnot. I appreciate that. You're on Saxa, good to see you. My man Niels Jensen, good to see you. All right. So if we're talking about now converting, well, what is the cost, right? You might say, well, converting, doesn't really cost much. So even though it's not ideal and it's easier to recruit, I could aggressively recruit. Some people, maybe they use that term, or they would think that they agree with that term. Well, this isn't converting. This is just aggressively recruiting. And I would say no such thing exists. You could more clearly recruit. You could recruit at a more in a more direct fashion, but there is no aggressively recruiting. At some point, it's converting, right? So what are the costs again of converting? You're wasting time. You're draining energy. You are muddying the waters. You are removing clarity of your identity and the mission. At some point, in order to make a connection, you will start to question the validity, the value of your own identity just to be able to make room for their identity. You want to connect with people in a way that transcends the value of the connection, right? You'll see this sometimes. People, they'll, I want to get married and have kids. And they wind up marrying a terrible woman and they wind up having a terrible wife. Or a woman winds up marrying a terrible man. He becomes a terrible husband. But because they wanted the family, because they wanted, the kids, they sort of bypassed the criteria to make sure that that outcome, that output was as valuable as they wanted it to be, right? So we're never going to compromise who we are, but that is sometimes a cost for converting. Another cost, tribally of converting is over time, your identity, the identity of the tribe begins to rot from within. I just spoke about, the compromises that some people make just to connect, with other people. Well, over time, your group will start to deteriorate because the people, especially if you're in a position of leadership, the people who followed you under some identity or criteria previously are now questioning if you are still that person, if you are still connected to that mission. There was a point where, I use this example of my martial arts school, where I had many people that were all about the mission of the Jungle Gym, my martial arts academy. And then over time, they realized, what? I really don't want to do the striking stuff. I really don't want to do the putting the gloves on and punching stuff. I just want to do the grappling or this or that. And I am not going to change the tribe and the mission of the Jungle Gym just to hold on to these people. It's part of the alliance codes, right? Honor the mission, respect the expiration date. Sometimes this expiration date is there just to make sure that I don't try to convert the individual or convert my tribe to accommodate the individual, right? So all that being said, what are some of the values that we want to use? We want to sort of put out there to attract people instead of having to convince them. Number one, you want to live publicly with your values being displayed. Don't feel the need to explain those values. You want to display your values because if they are your values, anybody that observes you is seeing the display of them. So this is not a performance as much as it is a consistency of character. I'm going to be who I am and do what I do, regardless of who happens to be observing. When people are asking me to defend or prove the validity of my identity, that is not a challenge that I am tempted or somehow compelled to engage. Well, I don't agree with your position here. Okay, that's all right. I don't understand why an individual would feel compelled to argue with people who are not in his tribe about the validity of what he believes. It comes down to the temptation of conversion. It comes down to, well, if I can get this person to believe me, or if I could prove him wrong, it validates my own position to myself. In other words, it's giving other people control of how you feel about you. Now, there is a distinction to be made, because I'm not somebody that goes around and says, I don't give a fuck what anybody says. I do give a fuck about what people say, but only the people who I've given the responsibility of giving me that feedback. I want to earn the respect of respectable men. Some of the allies that I'm connected to, I am very much motivated to honor their expectations of me. I'm very much motivated and compelled to live a life that gains their approval, because they are in my tribe, because I know they represent that third-party perspective that I cannot give myself, but that is also congruent with my stated goals and my stated mission. They know who I am, who I claim to be, who I strive to be in the future, so they can give me feedback when I'm off course. And I do want to accept that feedback. I do want to consider that feedback. But now to assign that power to people who are not on the hook to help me create a better outcome for myself, people who are disconnected from my tribe, people who, even worse, that are anonymous. A lot of this technology online is new. So because it's new, people get confused. They don't have the formulas, or the tools for the terrain that they're currently engaging. I remember in the beginning when I started doing stuff online and the trolls were out in force. And I'm talking about like late 90s, early 2000s, back on the old jiu-jitsu forums and stuff. You'd get these people who were completely anonymous, had some, username, and they would just be going to town. And you had a reaction that was the only reaction you had for this type of engagement, which was, in the real world, if somebody was saying that to your face, or somebody was spreading rumors about you. But if you had these formulas for people who did these things in the real world, where there was an embedded accountability, but now online there was no accountability. But a lot of people never evolved the tools that they were used to deal with these people. So they were getting angry with strangers the same way they would get angry with neighbors. And the whole dynamic is different between those connections. So sometimes, we want to understand that there are always going to be people who disagree with us, but there's always going to be another group of people who may or may not disagree with us, but know that if they prod us a certain way, we give them control over us. You have people who criticize your intentions, and they might not believe their criticisms at all, but they know you being criticized makes you lose your shit and become less effective. It's how you're manipulated and controlled. It could be, the construction of your own demise. I'll allude to the example in the book The Godfather. Sonny, when he was gunned down in the causeway, it was completely set up because he had a emotional temper that was consistent. So people used it to set him up, and he wound up dying as a result. This is what happens when we react to people who are outside of tribe, right? Which is why, again, it's so important. Speaking to the mission of this talk today, we recruit like-minded people. We don't convert people to agree with us, because sometimes the conversion is not legitimate. Sometimes the conversion is not sustainable. We pressure them. We convince them to adopt our criteria to join this connection, but eventually who they are, who they always were, bubbles up to the surface again. And now you have somebody who's offset from your tribe, operating from within your tribal walls. And eventually, it's traitorous behavior that you're dealing with, right? You want to be polarizing, right? So this past weekend, I went to Texas. I was in Texas. I love me some Texas. And I was in Wichita Falls for this year's Modern Warrior Conference, right? And the Modern Warrior Conference this year had a theme of the protector, right? So that was the theme, the context in which we were teaching the things that we taught. And, part of this conversation today's conversation is actually piggybacking off of some conversations I had down during the event. with a bunch of, individuals that were attending the event who seemed to be very invested in internet debate and arguing. And Tuan Harley, shout out to Tuan Harley, he had explained during one of these conversations something that I had told him about years ago. And he had years ago, he had come up to me and said, hey, MC, you're like, you really fight a lot online, and you really have these arguments, and and I said, okay, I want you to come here and look at this. And I showed him, I picked up the analytics for my social media. Again, this is 5-6 years ago. And I showed him, I said, okay, this is what happened when I was trying to be polite to everybody. This is what happened when I started drawing a line in the sand for my position and being more polarizing in my speech. That's where the energy starts to happen, right? That's where the friction occurs, right? If everybody's going with the flow, there's no friction. That's not how fires are started, right? So when you talk about virality online, a lot of times that's why it is. It's the friction of two polarized positions trying to engage. So I wasn't looking to dominate other people. I wasn't looking to convert to other people. But what I did is what this, number on the list of ways to recruit instead of converting, it's be polarizing. When you are polarizing, it repels the wrong people, right? One of the things that I do at every event, public event that I teach, is I mention that I am not Christian. I am not anti-Christian, but I am not Christian. The reason I mention I am not Christian is I almost want to get it out of the way. I don't want the interpretation of who I am to exist in a context that attendees of these events might assign to me. And then when they find out later on that I'm not Christian, somehow they feel like it was a bait and switch. Somehow they feel like I'm different than what they thought I was. And I may very well be. So I set the sort of criteria at the beginning. And I say it to be polarizing only to produce clarity. But there will be some people who, because I am not Christian, that don't want to do business with me, that don't want to build an alliance with me. Well, the logic of it is, wouldn't I want to know that early in the alliance rather than later on, where now either the alliance that we were both relying on falls apart because of that new information, or even worse, I'm now pressured, to not bring that up because of what it might do to the synergy of the alliance. That's not a position that I want to be in. It's ironically the opposite. The first person I ever heard articulate this was a guy named Zig Ziglar, right? So I actually think this was Jim Rohn talking about Zig Ziglar. Zig Ziglar from Texas, big Christian. And in the talks he gave around the world, he would always use Christianity, as a backdrop of his beliefs and his systems and whatnot. And Jim Rohn, as he used to tell it, would ask him, or at one point asked him, hey, Zig, don't you like we're in the middle of Japan? These people aren't going to be Christian. Why do you keep bringing that up? And what he would say was a similar position in that he'd say, well, this is who I am. This is what I believe. And I want these people to know that. And if that fact about me, disqualifies me from being connected with them, I'd rather them know that sooner rather than later. So there is something to being polarizing, not necessarily in a way to instigate conflict, but in a way where you don't run from it, right? I'm never going to speak in a way that allows a ambiguity just in case the person wants to connect with me, and that's I would say a character, quality that everybody should look to develop, because again, it needn't be the polarized talk that creates conflict, but I believe in a polarized way of communicating that creates clarity, right? So basically, there's no fine print in the contracts of alliance I look to sign with other people, right? When you're doing and acting that way consistently enough, you'll also attract the right people. You'll give the right people an ability to understand who you are at a much deeper level. When I talk about the term respect, right, breaking it down, re-inspect, meaning again, over and over, Again, like repeat, repetitive, redo, reclaim, et cetera, as a prefix. So it means this sort of over and over again idea. And then spect, connected to the words that mean to see, to look, spectator, spectacles, spectrograph, spectrum, all of these things pertaining to seeing. So respect is to see over and over again. And I assign that in my use of the word respect to mean who this individual is consistently being presented. I see the same person every single time consistently. He's not one person on Monday and another person on Tuesday. People who change who they are not respectable people by my criteria. And when you look at the origin of that word, that's exactly what the intentions are. At some point, respect devolved or morphed into this, this I like the person's nice to me, or we have stuff in common, or he is valuable, right? Well, no, respect is the repetitive display of an identity, right? The consistent display of an identity. I use the example of, jumping in water and there are a bunch of sharks there. And I tell you not to jump into the water and to respect the sharks. You better respect those sharks. Well, what do I mean? I don't mean that they're polite or have manners with the shark per se. It's really expect the shark to do shark things, to be a shark, right? That is what would be described if I said respect those sharks. So respect means something else, not I like the person, he's nice to me, or he's powerful, or any other, concept that we would attach to the word respect in modern times. It's really a consistency in the projection of who you are, right? And the last thing I'll probably say on this is you want your life to be a model, not a message. So what do I mean by that? If we are modeling a way to be, it is the happenstance or the consequence of being who we are that other people can observe us and come to their conclusions regarding the value of what our life is. But we are not living our life as a message. In other words, we are not living our life in a way that we're looking to change the definition of that observation that outsiders are making of us. When I say I don't give a shit about what outsiders think, it's that my life is not designed to alter the message that they're looking to share regarding my life. I'm not living for them. I am not living to gain the approval of other people or to even influence their perception of my life. I'm looking to be consistent enough in who I am that like-minded people who see me as an investment will look to do so, right? And that is why we recruit and not convert. So, got some questions here. Jeremiah Johnson, what's up, brother man? Good to see you. Saw you this past weekend. Aaron says, sorry, this is probably a dumb question. Impossible. But is the jungle gym just a place for your martial arts classes or also a regular gym people get a membership too? Well, I actually think that's a pretty good question because the way that I talk, sometimes people think the jungle gym is like a community center where we talk about these things. Well, no, the jungle gym is a martial arts academy. It's a martial arts academy that uses the language of martial arts training, the rituals of martial arts training to learn more about ourselves and equip ourselves with the ability to navigate life more effectively, right? And that's not written down anywhere. That's an off-the-head just description of what the jungle gym environment is. There are plenty of people who perform or train martial arts for different reasons. And I would say whatever those reasons that they train martial arts are found under the umbrella of what the jungle gym is designed to be. Some people just want to compete. Some people want to get in shape. Some people want to have friends. Some people want to push themselves physically. And I think that the pursuit of martial arts mastery is so valuable that all of those things could be engaged and met, through the training. And that's what we look to do. Aaron writes, It's awful too when people take these negative online interactions and allow it to bleed into their reality. So their loved ones and others have to suffer their negative attitude for essentially no reason. And you're absolutely right. And that's at the heart of why I try to motivate people to understand just how weak the influence of strangers actually is on your life. What these strangers are saying about you does not matter. What the people you care about are saying matters. What the people who care about you are saying matters. But when you're somebody, and I get into this one observation, this one application of it, when I talk about state, only the weak mind adds suffering to circumstance. Well, it is a very similar scenario where a bunch of strangers online are trying to make you miserable, and it has an effect that alters your state. And that is the version of you that everybody that cares about you or is connected to you in the real world has to deal with. Hey, you seem depressed today. Are you okay? Yeah, a bunch of people, were saying a lot of bad stuff about me online. It's like there's no value of that in the real world. All right. And we live, and last time I checked, the real world is where we live. So that should be, what we're trying to use as the backdrop of our morality, the backdrop of our rituals, the backdrop of how we look at the value of ourselves, how we look to forge our characters into being more consistent. Right. So pretty good. I got everything out that I wanted to. Just so you guys know, if you're not getting my emails, masterchimletter.com, go sign up. You get a free program for doing it. Right now, the Three Roads Mastermind is closed. Registration should be opening in a couple of weeks. I usually, once a month, I open it for a couple of days just to keep a handle on who's coming in. But on the emails, I'll be talking about that. And aside from that, good talk. I appreciate you guys being here. I will be here next week. And as always, brothers and sisters, pressure to power.